Gulf of Oman does not forgive hesitation. It is a body of water that has swallowed secrets and settled disputes long before any nation drew lines across its surface. On April 19, 2026, those waters became the site of one of the most direct acts of American naval force in the ongoing U.S.-Iran war. A 6-hour standoff that ended with gunfire, disabled engines, and Marines rappelling from helicopters onto the deck of an Iranian cargo ship. The vessel was the MV Touska, an Iranian-flagged container ship. She had departed Port Klang, Malaysia, laden with cargo, and made her way toward the Strait of Hormuz, bound for the Iranian port of Bandar Abbas. Before reaching Port Klang, the ship had been detected at China's Taikang port north of Shanghai on March 25th, arriving at China's southern Gowlan port on March 29th to 30th, where she loaded containers before making a stop at Port Klang anchorage on April 11th to 12th to take on further cargo. She was full. She was moving. And she was sailing directly into the teeth of a U.S. naval blockade. Since April 13th, the U.S. military had been enforcing a naval blockade on the Strait of Hormuz. The blockade was established as a direct countermeasure to Iran's own closure of the waterway to international tankers. A response to the war that had begun when President Donald Trump announced major combat operations against Iran on February 28th. With massive joint U.S.-Israeli strikes targeting military and government sites. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a strategic asset. About 20% of the world's crude oil and natural gas typically passes through this narrow waterway. Whoever controls passage through it holds leverage over the global economy. Both sides understood this. Both sides were pushing. Iran's Speaker of Parliament Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf had made Tehran's position plain just hours before the Touska incident, declaring it impossible for others to pass through the Strait of Hormuz while Iranian vessels could not. It was a statement of symmetry, a doctrine of mutual denial. Iran had briefly announced the strait's reopening after a 10-day truce between Israel and Lebanese group Hezbollah took hold, but reversed course again after Trump declared the U.S. blockade would remain in full force until Tehran reached a deal with Washington. Into this locked and dangerous corridor, the Touska moved anyway. The Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer USS Spruance, DDG-111, was dispatched to intercept her. The Spruance, with a displacement of around 9,000 tons, is more than 500 feet long and carries a crew of 329. It joined the fleet in 2011 and operates as part of the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, homeported in San Diego. This was not a patrol vessel sent to wave a flag. This was a warship carrying Tomahawk missiles, torpedoes, and Standard interceptors, a weapons platform designed for war. The Spruance moved to close the distance between herself and the Touska as the morning stretched into a long, tense confrontation. American forces issued multiple warnings and informed the Iranian-flagged vessel that it was in violation of the U.S. blockade. Those warnings were repeated over the course of 6 hours, with the Touska's crew failing to comply. 6 hours is a long time at sea, long enough for the men aboard both vessels to understand what the silence meant, long enough for orders to be radioed up chains of command, long enough for a decision to become inevitable. At the end of that 6-hour period, the USS Spruance transmitted a final warning, one that left no ambiguity about what was coming. The warning broadcast directly to the cargo vessel stated, "Motor vessel, Touska, motor vessel Touska, vacate your engine room. We are prepared to subject you to disabling fire." The crew of the Touska had been given a chance to move away from the part of their ship that was about to be targeted. What happened next was not a warning shot fired into open water. It was a precision strike against a specific compartment. The USS Spruance opened fire with its 5-inch Mk-45 gun, firing several rounds into the Touska's engine room. Analyst Carl Schuster, a former U.S. Navy captain, told CNN it would probably take at least 2 hits from the destroyer's gun to knock out the Touska's diesel engine, and that all 3 rounds fired by the Spruance in the CENTCOM-released video appeared to have struck the vessel. The engine room of a cargo ship is its heart. Hit it hard enough, and the ship becomes an object adrift, thousands of tons of steel with nowhere to go. The Touska went silent in the water. U.S. Marines boarded the Iranian-flagged commercial vessel in the Arabian Sea on April 19th, rappelling from helicopters launched from the amphibious assault ship USS Tripoli. In a grainy video released by CENTCOM, U.S. troops could be seen flying from the USS Tripoli on helicopters, then using ropes to climb down onto the deck of the Touska. The Marines were assigned to the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit. They came down fast, the rotors of the helicopters loud above the disabled ship. Below them, the Touska sat low and still, her propulsion destroyed, her crew no longer giving orders. Trump posted on Truth Social that the Touska was nearly 900 feet long and weighed almost as much as an aircraft carrier. The scale of the vessel was part of his message. This was not a small boat that had wandered into the wrong zone. This was a large, deliberate cargo operation that had made a calculated attempt to push through a blockade enforced by the United States military. Trump stated the ship was under US Treasury sanctions because of its prior history of illegal activity, and that the Iranian crew had refused to listen when given fair warning to stop. The Touska's crew included an Iranian captain and Iranian crew members, though it was not immediately clear if the entire crew were Iranian nationals. IRISL ships, those operated under the Islamic Republic of Iran shipping lines, are under the control of the Revolutionary Guards, and their crews are typically made up mainly of Iranians, sometimes also using Pakistani seafarers. Security sources said their initial assessments were that the vessel was likely carrying dual-use items after a voyage from Asia, goods that could have both military and industrial applications, including metals, pipes, and electronic components. Tehran's response was immediate and unambiguous. Iran's military declared that the United States, by violating the ceasefire and engaging in what it described as maritime highway robbery, had attacked an Iranian commercial vessel in the waters of the Sea of Oman. Iran's military further stated that the U.S. had destroyed the ship's navigational equipment and deployed troops on the deck, calling it an act of aggression, and warned that the armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran would soon respond and retaliate. The Touska was the first non-military Iranian ship that U.S. forces were known to have hit during the current war, and the first Iranian cargo vessel that the American military had captured since the start of the naval blockade. The seizure did not happen in isolation. It landed inside a diplomatic moment already stretched close to breaking. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said Vice President J.D. Vance would accompany Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to Islamabad for a new round of negotiations with Iran. Trump told Axios in an interview that the concept of the deal was done and that he felt they had a very good chance to complete it. Though hours earlier, he had threatened to destroy every power plant and bridge in Iran if no agreement was signed. The U.S. military said it had forced 23 ships to turn around as part of its blockade of Iranian ports. No tankers passed through the Strait of Hormuz on Sunday, according to ship tracking data, making it one of the quietest days in the channel since the conflict began. The silence of the strait was its own statement. Every tanker captain in the region had watched what happened to the Touska and made the same calculation. The water was controlled, the passage was closed. The Spruance's CENTCOM released footage showed the two vessels at significant separation when the gun fired, and 3 rounds were discharged with the likelihood that more followed off video. The Touska would need to be towed. Analyst Carl Schuster said the vessel would be taken to an anchorage or port for inspection or valuation, and that the seized ship could potentially become spoils of war. What remained when the helicopters pulled away and the Marines secured the deck was a disabled ship in disputed waters, a crew under foreign custody, and a conflict that had just crossed a new line. The U.S. had come to the Gulf of Oman not to warn, but to act. The Touska was the proof. And in Tehran, in the ministries and the military commands, the response was already being written.